Okay, I'm recording. So welcome everyone to SIG Apps. Today is the 11th of January. It's the first meeting back in the new year, so happy 2021, everyone. Just pasting the link to the doc here so folks can follow on. So the first thing here to discuss are job API enhancements. So there's a clip here, looks like, for adding suspend stop flag to the job API.
Yeah, so we talked briefly about this last meeting on December 14th. I think we tried to propose like something a lot more generic, but we decided to take a step back and really propose the low-level primitives that we would like to have in the job API to allow us to control the job as a whole by an external controller. And so one of the things that we wanted to add is a suspend or stop flag. Basically, when we create a job, we want to create the job in a stopped state, sort of like so that like the job controller doesn't create the pods right away, and that will allow an external controller to make sure that the cluster is ready to get that job executed. And by that, we mean, for example, checking quota, like checking quota for the whole job rather than individual pods, or making sure that the resources are provisioned by somehow communicating with an autoscaler. And this is extremely useful for cases where you want all or nothing scheduling. We thought that this simple primitive would allow us to do such a thing. And so, yeah, we proposed this. Hopefully, it is kind of clear enough. We have a KIP up by Adi as well, and I think Magic has been like we assigned Magic to it. But please let us know who else should look at it as well.
Hi, this is Magic. Sorry, I was hoping that I'll be able to look through it over the holiday break, but I was completely offline for most of the time. So I'm hoping to look at it within the next week, and I'll probably be, as soon as I'll ping you on Slack.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Overall, I personally don't have any objections on the stop flag. Probably it'll be the mechanics of how you want to proceed with, I don't know, if you decide to stop halfway through the job execution, because probably that will be the most contentious issue.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, the overall idea is perfectly legit. We just need to agree on how to approach whether stop means a suspend in execution, or rather it's a stop and remove everything and start from scratch. But I'll have a look at the PR, at the cap, and I'll leave comments in there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot, both of you. Put a link to the cap here, so if anyone else is interested in taking a link as well, go ahead and review. There's also this array job feature request.
Yeah, I opened an issue. Aldo is working on a KIP as well. I'll let Aldo introduce you to this. Like, I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody knows about it, but we are basically restarting this effort. Aldo?
Yeah, this is a long-standing request of having a completion index in the jobs, in the job pods, with the idea of this being enabling simple static partitioning. So I added the cap the basic usage is basically to have the index as an annotation that can be pulled through the downward API. And then the pods can use that to partition or to select their task. Now, furthermore, there are a lot of there are a couple of open questions. One of them is whether to also include it in the name, in the pod name. And this is useful because for certain use cases, such as MPI or other kind of similar types of jobs, they want stable host names or host names that they can predict. So that's one reason. But also another reason is the stable name allows to be able to avoid duplication. So if you have a stable name, you cannot replace a pod that failed without removing the failed pod first. So that's going to be useful for cases where they absolutely need a single running pod per index. But that's subject to discussion. I think we can discuss that in the CAP. The problem that this opens is how do we keep track of failed tasks, or sorry, failed pods, because that's the information we keep for we use the failed pods to calculate the status of the job, the number of failures, and do the backoff and eventually the backoff limit. So we need to figure out either how to calculate the failed jobs, the failed pods with some other mechanism, or drop this requirement. So I would like to have some discussion on that topic. But in that topic, in the topic of failed pods, I think there's an open issue for tracking failures and successes in a different manner. I honestly didn't look at this yet, but I would be willing to take that as well, because it will solve also it will solve this problem in the array job. I don't know if there is any existing conversations or existing approaches.
Right. So your proposal of array jobs reminds me Eric's idea of index jobs. Not sure if you get a chance to look through that particular issue.
Yeah,
I linked it before, and I wonder how much different the idea is. And I think I would probably go with the index job name, since that probably better expresses the idea of ordering. And if you look at the issue, it goes all the way back to shortly after we created the jobs.
Yes.
So it's definitely something that we do want to see happening. It is possible that some of the ideas are already written down in those issues. So it will be good to go through them and double check whether all those ideas from back then still applies, or do we want to do certain things differently, knowing a little bit more than before.
Yeah,
and the other topic. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, so I entirely based my proposal on this. It's like an iteration, and the doc is still available in the community repo. So I ported it, but I also simplified it drastically because a lot of the proposal is focused on easy of use in terms of kubectl run. And
Yeah,
I
that's
think that's
definitely
no
not something
longer,
that we. Yeah,
yeah. So I
that's
think the community is now more used to YAMLs. So I don't think giving all that power in the kubectl run is
run
necessarily
is
needed.
run is not anymore meant for creating anything other than pods. That happened quite some time ago. There was a lot of confusion around users, but we deprecated that functionality. So kubectl run
Oh, okay, I didn't know
currently
that.
only creates pods and nothing more. If you want to create something else, you need to use a specific kubectl create command. So I wouldn't worry about that at all. And it's definitely not a concern at all for the index jobs. Referring to your issue about the controller counting the failed ones, yes, we do want to maintain the information about how many jobs failed, because one way or the other, you want to know the progress of your current job. And there is an outstanding issue, how we should calculate those. And I had some ideas, and I would really want to see this issue being solved, because currently the fact that we need to keep all those pods around just for calculating the status might seem a little bit wasteful, especially if you think about running a job with, I don't know, 100 or 1,000 executions.
Mhm.
And basically, or any kind of long running tasks with this many pods. That basically means you'll have to reserve and you will be wasting this many resources for some period of time. So solving that particular one will be a key to also the problems you've mentioned before. And
One more thing I noticed is that another problem that could happen is that the pod garbage collection could trigger once we hit 2,000, 12,000 pods. So you would lose information anyways.
exactly, that's the other thing that that is possible. So we definitely need to figure out a reasonable approach forward.
Okay. Yeah, I can stick with you, perhaps in Slack or
Yeah, definitely. I'm
to.
definitely open to figuring something out. We can probably give it a try and see what's possible.
So we want to do this work in tree for sure.
The array job. So yes, one of the main reasons, well, there are two reasons. One is to avoid splitting the ecosystem. The problem with leaving these to third parties is that then third parties do pod management differently, or they could potentially do pod management differently, and that could confuse users. And the other reason is that this other cap of stop flag, we basically want a job to provide the basic primitives so that the job can be used as a unit um, across different controllers. So that's kind of the rationale.
I mean, going back to the very early days, the index jobs was definitely something that we, myself and Eric, we've seen as something that we want to have in the core. It just seems as a natural extension to the current functionality of the jobs without actually changing the API that greatly. So yeah, it's probably possible to do it outside of the core, but I would be probably pushing towards the entry because that's it will be the simplest, and the API I'm not expecting the API to be that significantly different from the current one, and that definitely will benefit all of the consumers of the job API.
I think in general, Kubernetes should be, or extensions should be done on top of workload APIs, not individual pods. Otherwise, we split the ecosystem too much.
I mean, I think there are definitely extensions that should be done on top of the workloads APIs where it makes sense, but I think there are definitely workload specific controllers that may do things differently that can be done out of tray. Like the original intention when the APIs were developed, and this is in the documentation, is that they should be forkable. So for specific use cases, it should be easy to fork an existing workload API and modify it to suit your use case. From SIG architecture, the general push is that, you know, no resource should be special, and the eventual end state that we'd like to get to is, you know, there are no really custom resource definitions, there are just resource definitions, and it's as easy for a third party to add one as it is to use one built in. But if you think that like this is a natural extension to the existing jobs API that can be implemented in a backward compatible way on what we have, I feel like that's a strong argument to do it in tree. If we're going to end up writing a second controller for it anyway, like if it's going to be completely orthogonal to the existing job controller, that kind of weakens that a little bit. So I mean, like, is that the approach we would be taking, a completely separate job controller, or will we be adding this into the existing job controller and building it on top of the V1 API?
It will be on top. I already have a prototype, which is still missing these details about keeping track of failed pods. But other than that, it's not a huge addition to the job API, to the job controller.
So that sounds like a strong argument for doing it in tree to me.
Yep, that was my expectation as well, that we, along with the index job, will also solve some of the almost always existing issues, like the counting of the pods, the completed or failed pods.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I think we can continue the discussion in the CAP. I have a couple of unresolved sections we can start discussing on. And yeah, we can also discuss on the topic of keeping the status for overall, for any kind of job, right?
I have one overall question, which is like sort of important for me because I need to know how to plan my work. When you're targeting this for, are you targeting it for 121, 122, further in the future?
Yeah, for alpha, definitely 121, and beta, hopefully the next release. But yeah, that can take a little bit longer depending on feedback, I guess.
Okay, so as part of the alpha, we would leave the problem of the counting of failed pods and completed pods, and we would focus entirely on the functionality of the index job. And then as part of the further evolution, we would be solving the pre-existing issues. Is that more or less what you were thinking about?
I don't know how complex it could be to solve the other problem. If it's not too much, I would be fine also having it in the alpha.
Oh, I'm not saying that it's not, we won't solve it. I'm preferring to lie down some minimal approach, and if you manage to do more, I'll be definitely open to see.
So I think it all comes down comes down to having the index in the pod name or not. If we don't have it there, we don't need the tracking. If we add it, then yeah, we will need the tracking. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'll have a look at the cap and I'll respond. What probably could be a reasonable approach forward. I'll try to find any notes if I have any on the topic and see where we can go with this, or what
Sounds
we
great.
were talking with Eric about it. Cool.
So
Thank you.
I have another question. So when we say the semantics are similar to stateful set, is there any notion that we would provide any, like, I'm not clear on what the fencing guarantees are, or if there are any fencing guarantees.
Sorry, what?
So like stateful set provides ordering based on storage used for fencing. So like it actually, as you're scaling up, there is some guarantee reasonably that you're really going to start stateful set 01 after stateful set 0, right? For job, are we trying to guarantee that, or are we just trying to provide like best effort ordering?
I think best effort is enough. I don't see any particular reason why you would want strict scale up or scale down.
Yeah, that was my approach as well. Especially that if we would have, yeah.
I mean, there are definitely use cases, like if you wanted to try to use jobs for workflow orchestration where strict ordering would be beneficial, but that doesn't sound like what we're trying to solve, which is fine, but I think we should call it out explicitly is all I'm saying.
Yeah, that's a good approach. Maybe we can leave it off as a potential improvement. It will be definitely backwards compatible. It will be just additional restriction if you wanted to have one.
I'm just saying maybe call it out explicitly as a non-goal so that it doesn't become.
Yeah. Sounds good.
And then I think it does. So you want to split these two things into separate features and then track them separately, correct? Like that sounds like the decision we're making.
The stop flag and the array jobs? Or what do you mean?
Also potentially doing the counting as well. Like you want to get the array job semantics in place. The counting will be done separately, potentially thereafter, but we're not going to block alpha on that being present. And then the stop flag, if that gets done at all, that would be done as a completely separate enhancement.
Right, yeah, the stop flag is a different, probably another different feature flag.
Yeah, blocking alpha on job tracking, that's fine. That's fine to me to not block.
You might just want to call that out in the plan for the release stuff. Where is that section? The graduation criteria.
Okay, yeah.
Are array jobs meant to be retried?
Sorry, the pods?
I mean, the array jobs, are they meant to be retried if they fail or something?
Yeah.
Because if you choose identity for those pods just because of indexing, that's going to make it hard, right? Say a node goes down and it won't go back up, and you can't create that pod again until that node comes back, right? If you have an identity for a pod, the only one who can delete it is the kubelet from that node. You can't even delete it from the API normally.
So I would say we should retry and leave it to the application to handle.
What I meant is you can't create the pod if you make it having an identity. That's why most of the controllers just create random named pods. If you name them -1, you can't recreate that if that's on a node that is down.
So to be clear, like with stateful set, under a network partition, the intended use case is that there's operator intervention because you're probably dealing with a database. With jobs that are retriable, under a network partition where the node is removed and there was a pod that was scheduled on that node that, let's say, job 01, you cannot relaunch job 01 to retry it with that name again until there's a timeout that we have configured where eventually the node would be considered gone and stuff would be deleted anyway. But it's a fairly long timeout. So you're not going to be able to retry that job again until that pod is explicitly deleted. So that will require either that timeout expiring or the network partition healing, that node rejoining the cluster, and then the pod being deleted that way. So retry would be very difficult if you use a deterministic name for these ordered jobs.
So you can't force delete the pod at all?
You can't.
Like the API server prevents that if the node name is set?
You will set a deletion timestamp on this pod, and the only one who can remove it is kubelet from that node.
Right.
Or you have to go a long way to do it, but a normal controller can't just delete it.
So basically, given that job guarantees a certain completion number, that basically overrules the fact of having a stable naming in the job.
If you want more than one completion and you keep the failed pod, you can just run it twice by definition. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you have non-deterministic name, you don't care about the name, you care about the number, and that was one of the goals that we did jobs.
I'm certainly for random names because, as we mentioned earlier, like you have to choose one of the properties from CAP, right? You either get consistency or you want availability. That's just a choice you want to make.
And I think the concern for job with this particular case, if you do go with the deterministic name, like with stateful set, it's kind of a okay choice to make because typically you have long-lived applications that are running, and when they do go down, it is often something where you'd want to intervene, or like with something like Cassandra, you don't care if you lost one node anyway, right? With jobs, because there's a lot more churn, right? Like there's a lot more, they're higher throughput. I would think that the probability of failures, you'd be more susceptible to failures. So there'd probably be a higher frequency when you would potentially wedge if a node is down for some reason. So it might not be the best user experience.
Okay, that's all fair. Okay, then in that case, I'll try to order my thoughts on this, but I might be updating the CAP to remove the stable names.
What is the purpose of the stable name again?
One use case is there's in like training, machine learning training, you have like two sets of, I think they call it reinforcement training, for example. Two sets of pods. I think they call them like the actors and the learners. And you need stable names so that you would know to like which actor you're gonna be talking to. And both of them are actually jobs that are running to completion.
Yeah,
the other one is NPR.
It's HPC or machine learning use cases where the topology of communication between your run to completion workloads matters.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so you're trying to solve. Well, what about?
I mean, in that case, like some are using stateful set. The problem with stateful set is that when a pod like completes, it can't exit because it will be created again. The problem with this is that you're going to be holding onto resources that can be used by others, like GPUs, etc. So when a pod completes, you want to actually just like complete and not start again, because they could finish at different times, and you want to release the resource as soon as possible. You can't just leave it hanging there.
You have potentially you're competing for potentially scarce resources. So I mean, the way I've done stuff like this in the past would be to, and again, this is kind of why I brought up the idea of a custom controller for a use case like this, is like if you had a service per pod, right? The service would give you a unique name that you could use to set up your communication topology that would be completely independent of how your compute is laid out. So if you had an individual job failure and you had like, job 0 service, all the other jobs can communicate directly through that service to tap to
Right.
that pod. But
Yeah.
that's definitely probably not something we want to do in tree. So the orchestration around that would be something that you would have to do on top of it. So let me, like, if you had this array job concept and then you wanted to build a higher level controller that could do something like manage the network topology on top of it without using stable names, but using something more, using an indirection like service to do the network communication, well, the network coordinates, would that be sufficient?
We thought about this. Basically, you're trying to have like a virtual IP over each and every pod. I mean, there's a lot of complexity in achieving. The other thing is scalability. I mean, when you introduce services, we're talking about like your proxy and syncing and all of that jazz. When we talk about like massive jobs, that's a lot of burden on the whole system. Like just syncing these endpoints across all the nodes it is a big problem.
I mean, I would think though, like if you're creating a massive number of pods, right, you still have to update the pod siders respectively on the individual nodes, and you still have to update Kubi proxy for all the pod IP addresses. You would be going like 2x if you did a service per pod. So you would have double, and you the number of endpoints would proliferate. But I mean, you already have that problem is kind of the way I think about it. I could be wrong there though.
I mean, with stable names for pods, you don't have that. You don't have all that syncing at all, right? Like, because it's not a service, like kube proxy is not involved at all with this.
Okay, yeah, because you don't have a service at all. You're not using anything. You're going to try. But then how do you do discovery for the pods anyway? You would just use.
You just like, the job name, and then there's a pattern, right? For the pod names, like stateful sets.
Okay.
But that's fair. Like I don't think it's a slam dunk that as you get all mentioned, it's going to be easy to introduce that stable names. But I guess we can, yeah.
But stable set also generally uses a headless service for DNS to explicitly allow that discovery. Were you planning on using a headless service or no?
I haven't thought about it. I mean, a headless service, why would you want to use a headless service like with the example you mentioned? I don't think it would solve the problem. You still need to redirect the traffic to the right pod.
My question is,
I think they want to use the standard DNS that you get for port names, right? So you don't have to go through anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you're picturing only jobs within this like workload or only pods within this index job are going to communicate with each other. There would be no external.
Yeah, exactly. So it's deterministic. Like basically, you like your application, let's call it, contains two jobs. Like as I mentioned with reinforcement learning, you have the actors and the learners, and they know each other's like prefix name, which is, for example, the learner and the and they just add indices to them. Like it's the application's problem. Like again with MPI, it's the same thing. Rank 0, for example, they assume that it's the driver, and then all the other ranks, they just like 1, 2, 3 up to the job, like the number of ranks that you have in that job. So yeah, it's not a service. That's the difference exactly. It's a job that knows its names basically.
It's more like something you like think of it like MPI like jobs.
Exactly, yeah. So there's no discovery really there per se. Yeah.
Cool. Anything else on these two enhancements?
I have a favor for Aldo to do. When you will be removing the index from the name, don't remove it, but write it as something that was considered and why it wasn't picked, and ideally put the arguments that were laid out during today's call. I think it will be valuable for readers to know what has been discussed.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, I'll order my thoughts on this. This is very valuable conversation. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. So moving on to the next item on the list, graduating job TTL to beta.
Yeah, so I updated the KEP. I sent a PR to update the KEP basically. And what I'm proposing here is to graduate to beta without having this feature in pods. And if we want to have it in pods, it would be a future work under a separate feature flag. I did sync offline with Janet. Unfortunately, she's not able to attend these meetings because she's in a completely different time zone. But she was okay with this, and now I'm bringing it to the SIG to get consensus on this one. And so, yeah, I have the KEP open. Please take a look. And I'm wondering if anyone has any objections on moving the pod TTL after finish as a feature work rather than being coupled with this specific feature flag.
I probably have only one question. If I remember correctly, the TTL was an annotation on a job, and I was wondering whether we are considering promoting this as a regular job field in that case, or
I think it's in the job spec. It's not an annotation.
Oh, if it's this, might be thinking about something else.
Yeah, I remember seeing it actually.
Yeah, okay, that's cool. So there was no question.
Or did you want to try to divorce it entirely from the life cycle of the pod garbage collection or pod time to live?
The plan is just to promote it as it is from alpha to beta.
Right, but I mean, like right now, like the whole life cycle, like isn't it still the one giant spec or one giant kind of feature for pod and job as well?
So right now it's not, like it's only implemented for jobs.
Right, I know it's only implemented for jobs, but with the initial proposal that Janet brought forth like a while ago,
Right.
the proposal was for both pod and job. And I believe, if my understanding is correct, that we're continuing to track both of them as one feature. Maybe we should, if we haven't, maybe we should just consider splitting them entirely and then just tracking this as a completely separate feature.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm proposing, and that's why I moved it into future work. But do you suggest a different, like, should I create a different issue as well, like for the pods and just?
I'm not. I'm asking if what the SIG wants, like if that makes sense, because it does look like we're going to be able to promote this more rapidly toward a general availability, and we haven't made any progress on the pod TTL. There was a lot of pushback from API machinery about the semantics around that anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this seems to have life where the other does not. So maybe, I mean, splitting it seems reasonable to me.
That makes sense to me.
What was the pushback from API machinery? I'm thinking, like, should we promote stuff that there is a pushback against?
The pushback wasn't for job TTL, it was more specific to pod. Right.
But those are essentially the same, right? As I recall, those were the same field and the same controller, where we just replace pod with job, right?
It's a different field. The job has a field at the job level, the pod has a field at the pod level.
Right, like it's a field in a spec, and otherwise those controllers are basically copy-paste.
I mean, it could have been implemented in the same controller, but the thing is, yeah, as Ken has mentioned, the pushback was on the implementation actually of the pod TTL to finish. It was never about the job one.
Right.
So I don't suppose you know more specific about why they minded the pod implementation.
What their concerns were?
Yeah.
You have to go. I can go find it. I mean, it's back on the original cap that Janet for it anyway. Like, it's the entire conversation is captured there. I forget exactly what the concern was, but I believe Daniel was the one who was primarily worried that it would be unreliable or that it would conflict with the existing pod GC.
Right, and this goes also to the point where we should split them because they are really different, kind of at the higher level in terms of features and semantics. So why should we track them under one flag and under one feature?
At least to me, they looked pretty similar. At least last time I was reading the proposal when Janet was working on it. But I'm not sure if we want to commit to an API and then figure out another API for pods for a very similar thing.
I'm not suggesting that we deprecate the existing API for the pod TTL. I think we should keep it. I'm just saying the implementation, we might go back to the separate features is all I'm saying.
I don't think we have that API in the pod yet, by the way. It only exists in the job, but I can double check.
I was just checking in the pod. I'm not seeing that. I think I think I'm okay with calling out that we will progress the job TTL part and probably point to the discussion about why pod is not, and let's try to figure out what do we want to do with pod before eventual GA. And I would put that as a requirement to, before we decide what to do, before we decide what to GA, we will have a definitive answer whether we will approach pod TTL from a different side or we will entirely drop this from the original proposal. And if so, why we pick this way or the other way.
Sounds good. I can update that future work section to point to that discussion as well and put it as a requirement to figure out a definitive, like to reach a consensus on the pod part for beta to GA graduation.
I'm fine deferring to beta or to GA transition eventually.
Sorry, can you say that again?
I was just saying I'm fine with leaving the decision for promoting from beta to GA about pods and stuff. So
yeah. Sounds good.
Okay. Stateful set max unavailable. Looks like this is an implementation.
It merged. This was only on here just to make sure that, just to let Mayank ask if he needed anything else in order to get it through. But it looks like it merged.
I don't think it did.
Oh, it didn't merge.
I overreview there, and I've noted that for future days this week, hopefully.
Okay.
Cool. Great to see that coming through. And then finally, PDB GA.
Yeah, so we're following up on this with Wojciech to handle the production requirements. So I hope this will be ready to merge soon.
Sweet.
Is there anything else you need from SIG Apps, or is it just a production readiness review from Wojciech?
On this one, I think it's just a production readiness. I hope to have a PR with for adding conditions to PDBs later this week. But yeah, I'll ask for a review when I have something ready there.
Cool.
Excellent. Okay. Okay, so the last thing on the list here is conformance testing. I think we were trying to get an idea if folks were interested in looking into this. Ken, I think you had a bit more context here, right?
So I think my concern is kind of this, right? Like looking at what it seems like they want. They want like a per resource, per verb kind of flow for coverage for conformance. And I'm not entirely sure that makes sense for the workloads controllers. I mean, we could do it, but I don't know if there's a lot of value in it. So the point of conformance testing is to make sure that we have a fairly strong definition of what it means to correctly implement the workloads APIs, so that like if you're K3S instead of K8S and you pass conformance, people have a reasonable expectation that when they run their workloads on top of you, you implement the same semantics as the standard open source distribution. Do people feel like we have that with our conformance, or do we think that we have issues that are unaddressed there? And then what do we think we can do as a path forward to getting better coverage, or do we even think that's important to do now?
I haven't seen personally much missing coverage, except that was the case where some defaulting changes in the spec, but I don't think this is covered in these tests.
When I was looking through those results, I was a little bit surprised that some of the endpoints popped up in that report, because I was pretty sure that we have tests for those areas. The question is, maybe they are just not part of the conformance, and if that's the case, maybe it's all about, I don't know, including those bits into the conformance, or promoting some of the tests into conformance. That was my take. I know that I'll be looking at the batch related stuff, especially from the cron job side of things, because we will be promoting cron jobs further. So that's definitely something that I'll be looking closely into it.
I'm not seeing any apps endpoints in this ineligible list.
I got this from, if I remember correctly, Ryan, written through with I and double A. he was talking about the API Snoop report last time or 2 meetings ago. He sent me that in the private Slack conversation. Not sure if everyone else are aware.
Okay.
So here he explicitly calls out all the APIs. I mean, untested endpoint read apps v1 namespace stateful set status. Although maybe we're not reading status, just status. It's, yeah, well, it should be pretty simple, theoretically.
What's the work involved in supporting these endpoints?
Probably someone just has to go through our E2Es and modify them such that they will show up green on this test. I don't know. Create apps v1 namespace stateful set. I'm positive we have a test that is creating those.
Yeah.
Okay, I misread the report. Yeah.
Okay, the following tests cover endpoints as listed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Do we really want to have a test for list all replica sets for all namespaces?
This might also be something that we should talk to SIG Conformance about, maybe.
Yeah, that's, I mean, some of them are maybe fair, but some seem a little bit over.
Yeah. I guess I'm kind of curious how other groups are also tackling this.
Say read app stateful set status. That's just something you don't retest as you see it in the normal endpoint, right? So we probably just don't treat it separately. You get the status with regular get.
Right.
Yeah, and majority of us usually just gets the resource because you will be one way or the other just looking at the entire resource, not just the status. But like I said, we could probably tweak some of the tests to pick just the status of a resource in the tests. That's feasible, but I'm not sure if we actually want to invest our time into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to hear from SIG Conformance on how much they actually want us to do these, because I think you're right, some of these don't necessarily make sense.
I mean, the question is basically whether we want to have 100% test coverage because someone figure out that will be the best approach, or it's better to have a consistent and reasonable 90% coverage to endpoint to the endpoints that does make sense, and leave off those less obvious. I don't know, just thinking out loud.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Do we know who added this to the agenda?
I'm guessing that will be Ryan, the same that was presenting this topic last time.
Okay.
Let me see. It might be, yeah. In the last call, December 14th, towards the end, there's a conformance testing of apps endpoints. And there's a contact person, Ryan,
Oh yeah.
KL. So probably worth writing to him and including this SIG mailing list and see where we go from here with regards to that conversation.
Sounds good to me. Looks like we're at time. So before we wrap up, if there's anything anyone wants to quickly discuss, and give a minute or two, otherwise we can just end now. Okay, sounds like there's no burning desire to discuss something. So great, we'll end here and we'll see everyone again in 2 weeks. Thanks again for the great discussion today, everyone.
Yeah, thanks again. Thanks all of you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.